Well, hello again. We find ourselves in a very unique situation this week. We're on the road and bumping into a lot of security industry personalities. And one of the things that Mark and I talked about from the security north and south perspective is doing some security industry personality profiles. So we're fortunate to have a great personality. Mark, who we got today?
Yeah, Eddie, great to see you. First of all, nice
Sure.
to be in the same room, right? I mean, usually we do this online. I'm in my little office. You're in your space. But more importantly, joining us today, Jeff DiDomenico. Jeff from Trackforce Valiant TrackTIk. Yes. Thrilled to have you join us, sitting here in the same room. And let's get this rolling. We've got this thing called My Security Story. It's a hashtag, and we trying to get people to share, what their beginnings, their ins, their outs, their experiences with. What's yours?
Well, before I say that, I want to thank you guys for including me in this. We've talked a lot about the need to really let the security industry know what's happening and kind of carry the torch a little bit for them. So I'm privileged and happy to be here and work with both of you guys in different capacities. But my story is not so funny and not so original, but I say this all the time. I never held post, right? So because love when these guys say, I was 9 years old and the minimum wage was $1.27. And I said, I'm sorry I don't have that, but I did come of age. And I was fortunate to live next to a kid I grew up with. It was Anthony Petracco. Started a company called OCS Security. Okay. And prior to that, I was in a family business, the distribution business, actually computer supplies. And I learned some really interesting skill sets that really apply to any business, but really helped me in security, which was relationship building and trying to be collegial with your competitors, which has always been valuable. But my security story started with Anthony in 2000. And Anthony started this company at 2,500 security officers, and he would pridefully do the Thanksgiving Day parade. And he had ADP as their outsourced payroll company. And he asked for paychecks, individual paychecks for that day to recognize those reps. And I said, we don't do that. We don't do same-day paychecks.
Okay.
So that's how it started. Anthony said, aha, light bulb moment, payroll and billing, one line item, which is labor, which is 90% generally of the cost of goods. Yeah. I think I've got something. And so it was fortunate that I had just sold our business. We joined him in 2000. And the very first day, he was not on site with me that day. Actually, was going to install software at HSS. Tony York, another one of our mentors. I'm hoping maybe on one of your shows. And he taught me rule number one, which was security officers, not security guards. So that was a powerful lesson.
Well said. Yeah.
The second thing, Anthony threw this 3-ring binder on my desk. And he said, when I'm back in 4 days, it was about 35 copies of the security letter by Bob McCree. Everybody knows him for his list, but he actually wrote a fairly interesting newsletter that catered to the security industry, but had a lot of guarding. And being in the Northeast, he represented, as Eddie put it, personalities in the business. Yeah. Rick Rockwell's and others were daily diets on the interview. So it was kind of enlightening to see. I knew nothing of the industry. And so we started, and the next thing I know, 9/11 comes. And all of a sudden, right, I'm starting to understand what security really is. Yeah. And now for the first time, at least in my career, I recognize that even though industry professionals have been doing this 30, 40, 50 years, this was a new card in the deck, right? This was a new threat.
Yeah. Things changed radically at that point.
Wow. And so that was an interesting one for me in terms of trying to, in my head, understand what that meant and how we could perhaps serve individual needs of people now that had a different philosophy. But the one call that hit me on that day, it was maybe 2 days afterwards, a large client recently acquired Summit Security, and one of the brothers, the owners, called me up and said, Jeff, as you know, you had the Ingersoll Rand biometric hand readers in the lobby. Right. We'd like to know who checked in that day for us. So, boy, that was a really interesting way to recognize the power of technology, recognize the moment, and certainly feel very passionate about wanting to serve people in it. Yeah. So that started our process, and then I took some notes, but I didn't bring them with me, but talking about events that kind of triggered. And then there was the Vance Security was one of the first companies. I can ask Bob Perry this, but I believe sold for the highest multiple ever in 2002, sold to a public company called SPX, sold it 2 years later. But that was my first foray into, wow, so there's real outside
stuff
interest.
Going on,
There's something exciting happening here. So those kinds of events started to happen with great proportion and impact. And I guess then 2004 arrived and we became social media people. And so each one of these tripwires came with it opportunities, but also came with it security challenges. And I would say maybe the most prolific one, other than the transformation of our industry, the consolidation, having met Brian Sescalini in 2005. And of course, I don't think he even knew that there was going to be an $18 billion roll-up. Yeah. But again, there was this momentum about our industry, about outside private equity money and roll-ups and consolidation. And then 2008 occurs, and the Obama administration comes in and starts to regulate with great veracity. FMLA and minimum wage and Affordable Care Act. And so we had to take our platform in a different direction, right? We were all about hours and time collection, and now we had to talk about applicant tracking and
rules.
Rules.
Manage these rules.
Big time. So those were kinds of events that happened in my security story. But the one that sticks with me most, that was prolific through the entire time, even as recently as this week, is the great people that I've met, people that are really serve their associates and serve our nation, whether it's law enforcement, military or not. There seems to be this great ability to want to serve. And I see that really on an ongoing basis. And I don't know a lot of other industries that can stake that claim. So it feels good.
No, and it's interesting that you touched on a bunch of different things, and great story. Thank you for sharing, and just the potential interest from the outside. We're in this industry, right? We live it every day, and so on. So it's definitely it's interesting to see, and you took it really in a direction of, when Eddie and I first started talking about doing this little podcast, and our as we joke, our tens of followers that listen.
wait, got an updated count, Mark. 23. So we're good.
Yes, we hit 23.
We cracked the double digits.
Power in numbers.
I knew bringing Jeff on was a good idea. So this is
we're going to hit 25 for sure after this. But we like to talk about the business side of security. So it's interesting that you kind of brought those parallels in. So it's not just the security business, but the business of security. So those two items. So it's good.
Right. Well, there's the other part, and I've been treated just so well by many of the owners and yourselves included in whatever social gatherings that draw attention to our industry. And one of the things that really hit me too is that a lot of our folks spend a lot of time on the road. Like I saw when COVID hit, another catastrophe, right? I say this all the time. My dad used an expression that you can't say that you've ever managed if you haven't managed through a crisis. And that's about as big a crisis you're going to have. But we were talking before that I guess security is used to crises, right, on a regular basis. And some of them are very personal. We had a client out in California that had social media just occurred. And they did a lot of stadium work, and they had a security officer acting in an inappropriate manner, and it had him on film, right? Which now everybody has.
Seconds.
And seconds later, Facebook has it. And it's a new challenge for the legal team as then their customers.
It is. And you mentioned earlier, too, that oftentimes in the security industry, we focus on the security aspect, which is obvious. That's what we do.
Right.
At the end of the day, we're trying to bring security solutions, and sometimes it can sound very high-minded, but we are security professionals trying to bring those security solutions. But we also have to remember that we are in the people business, and people bring a lot of challenges. First of all, from a management standpoint, how do you mentor people? And one of the things we're going to be talking about in future podcasts is, what does the career pathway look like in security? I know you and I have talked about this before. We've all got different stories, and we've shared our #MySecurityStories in the past about starting as a security officer. I was that 9-year-old on the post I think we were talking about before.
Was it $1.25?
When he said that, I thought, did he get a raise? Was that? I had a bad agent back then. But we have all these different challenges, and they are multiplying every single day. I mean, that they are just happening in a rapid pace. Just here in the U.S., not to mention globally, depending on what state you operate in, there's a different set of rules and challenges from state to state. But one of the things I think that makes you a very intriguing and broad security personality is you talk to a lot of company CEOs and owners. So a very broad question, but when you talk to that group of people, what are they worried about in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah, well, Eddie, thank you for that. I take that really seriously. It's a goal every year to speak to 150 to 200 CEOs. COVID made it super easy. I was actually like a 240 something.
People were home. They were waiting for you to call. When's Jeff going to call me?
Right. I'm not in an airport. You can get me now.
That's right. You can get me now.
Yeah, and they were lonely. And some of the businesses almost shut down, right? You talk about pivoting. But Eddie, I think that's a great question. And again, and so I do that. I use that as a conduit to a lot of information. It really is uber helpful. And so the first thing, the good news, I start with the good stuff, is that they're interested in doing business in other states. So there's a big subcontracting underground, right? Some people have made business models over it, like Protos and others. And so that's number one. The second big thing is everybody wants to know what someone else is doing, which is why I think this kind of podcast is super important. Not this episode, but what you all.
This one. You meant this one.
I didn't mean this one.
You did.
But no, kidding aside, that people want to know, right?
Yeah.
And so we used to publish. We thought we were very avant-garde. And we used to start publishing billing rates and payroll rates and number of hours and turnover in aggregate, of course. Yeah. And I had to convince Anthony, but it took me 10 years that it was okay to give that in aggregate. No one was going to get us in trouble. But Eddie, most of them now are speaking about COVID's gone, rearview mirror. We pivoted or we didn't pivot. We recognize that there's a recession, for good or for bad, and we're now able to understand how to maneuver that, whether that's with my bank on interest rates or doing better with regards to recruiting. But most of them now recognize a pivot has either happened, about to happen, or they better be part of it.
Right.
Yeah. Now, they're coming off a lot of them are coming off high single, double-digit organic growth. In most parts, because some of the leaders in the industry are having a hard time consolidating on these acquisitions at a rate of speed that makes some symmetry and delivering a product that is recognizable to the client and defensible. So a lot of them has grown this way. I call it a false positive. But a lot of them have said, over 50%, Jeff, what should we be looking at? I see that you post all these things. Is it video monitoring first? Right. Is it robotics next? Right. Is it drones, right? And I think it's very situational, depending upon what your customer mix is. But the good news is there's active discussion. There's conscious competence around, okay, we need to do something. And of course, you guys are not the guys to ask because you've already made that pivot and done so for now a couple of years. But I think that's the biggest undercurrent right now that they share. Of course, labor is always. There's never a conversation that comes up. And I would
especially lately too. I mean, lately. I say lately, the last couple of years, but even more so, more voraciously than before.
Without question. And I would say to you, the cool thing about that is that there's more recognition. I'm on LinkedIn. I see lots of companies taking pictures with the box of donut and the certificate. That's a great start. It's a great start. But there is recognition that with technology, your people have to evolve.
Right.
So it's not we're just going to use the same old people or use less of them. No. Actually, you're going to entrust them with technology, and thereby they're going to need a different skill set. So there's a learning component. But I would say on the hiring front, the first time ever, at least a dozen times I heard this year, Jeff, we turned down business. I've never heard that before. In my 23 years, couldn't take that contract. Wow. Kind of a problem, right? Or a challenge.
Yeah, and definitely couldn't do it the way that they have always done it, right? I mean, that's something that's, definitely changes. And it's an interesting segue from, doing business the same way that we've always done it now. I mean, our customers, or from what you see, our customers, so end users of security, are they asking for something different? Or are they saying, hey, these are my assets, secure them? Do it in the way that you see fit.
Yeah, so for good news for me, I now have a new purview with the TrackTIk acquisition. A large part, almost 25% of our overall business now is with our customer's customer. And my golden rule has always been he who's closest to the customer wins and wins often. And there's a great story that I won't bore you with on this podcast, but it's a good one about that and how real that is. And so now we're getting conversations with security directors at hospitals.
Right.
And at higher ed. And in some retail establishments, talked to one of the directors regionally for Home Depot. So it's interesting to hear their discussion saying, hey, how come I can't ask my physical guarding company to do X and Y? I go to the shows, I see all the technology, right? Well, how come they're not innovating? Yeah. And I think that's probably a lag in our industry. And I'm going to talk about in a presentation that's coming up about how these other industries tipped, like taxis, like hotels, right? We all know about the Amazon story, but there have been industries very rooted like baseball that have now been data-driven technology companies. Yeah. And so I don't know what's taking our industry so long, but I think it's here. And I think with all great evolutions, they tip relatively quickly. If you look at the Wright brothers, it took 44 years before supersonic travel actually happened. But if you looked at the last 10 years, it was exponential. Yeah. So I think we're in that mode right now. And so, Eddie, that's what people want to know. I just don't think they know what steps to take.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we have a place in our industry and the history of our industry where that bar of entry is not there anymore. But one of the things that I talk about is there's still that psychological bar of entry.
Wow.
And a lot of people in our industry talk about what actually works, what doesn't work. And this is not a very profound or a statement full of wisdom. And that's why my Harvard lecture invitation keeps getting lost in the mail. But
take notes, folks. Here it comes.
But it really, cut this part out of the podcast and send it to the Library of Congress for posterity. But no, it really comes down to what works and what solution we can present that is solving an actual problem. And I use a couple of examples when I talk about the rapid adoption of technology that took a long time to begin with. I mean, you look at just electronic timekeeping, something a lot about. People think, well, that's been around for a long time. We did it the same way for thousands of years.
Right.
Thousands of years since ancient times.
Right.
When you had a Roman soldier, basically putting it on a tablet. We did that the same way until just a couple of decades ago. It was a rapid thing, but I can remember, and this is just, an anecdotal example, but our company started doing residential cameras, and I was one of the first ones, and this has been several years ago, to have cameras on my phone. And I can remember being in a client meeting one time and showing the cameras, and it was like I was showing them something just from Mars. Everybody's passing around my phone. This is your front yard? Are you kidding me?
Clear it is.
And fast forward just about 6 months later, with the invention of Ring and some others, I was in a similar scenario and tried to pull the same stunt, and everybody else pulled their own cameras out and phones and going, "Oh yeah, I got one too." And I sort of went, "Oh, okay, that's not it's not such a neat thing anymore." So the industry, once they do adopt it, it becomes almost second nature. And again, we talk about this a lot, and I appreciate you pointing out too the security officer versus security guard. That's one of the things that as an industry we have to have more recognition of, but let's use that term for a minute. The whole guarding concept is slowly being replaced by the solutions concept. Is that going to be with personnel? Absolutely. I tell people that's going to grow, but it better be with also an adoption of technology to have that blended solution. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and again, it's sort of along the same lines of that recognition of the industry. I know you're passionate about that. How do we do a better job telling our story? Because that's, I mentioned before, and we both have unique stories, or we say they're unique. And I've told my story before I started as a security officer, and I got to where I'm at. And I walked around for many years thinking that I was a unicorn. It's so unique. And then I started meeting literally dozens of people with the exact same story. And I started to really get bummed out, like, nobody's telling these stories. And certainly nobody's telling the story. I shouldn't say nobody, but we have a hard time. So how do we do a better job telling our story?
I've given this a lot of thought. I've spoken to industry leaders about this, and I hate to oversimplify this, but I really do think it's simple, right? So the world got flat with social media, meaning back in the day, it was costly to build brands, right? We were very fortunate. We entered the payroll business. We had this nice small company called ADP. They were $10 billion. So they set the pick for us. They did all the air cover about outsourcing payroll. Why would you do it? We don't have the leaders telling that story. And I don't think it's an expensive endeavor. And a rising ship does raise all boats. And I think that with a very small budget and the right leadership, you could go find a significant company that does brand awareness, and you could get that mall cop thing squelched pretty fast. I really believe that. And I believe that it would really help us all as an industry. But it's going to require some of the bigger players, right, to institute some of those.
It's going to require leadership. It's going to require, I think, stopping the acceptance of, just put a guard there, to use the guard word as opposed to security officer. Just put a guard there. Well, no, there are other ways that you can secure that. There are other ways that you can drive to peace of mind for that customer. Yeah, there's something that needs to be protected. There's something that needs to be there. But you can't just be that same old,
But the stats are there. The milk commercials. Right? I love New York.
The Maytag repairman?
I mean, there's tons of them that tell that story and tell it very well. And when they told it was radio, print, and television, It was expensive.
Yeah.
I had a guy back in the 70s. It was a neighbor, and it was a cotton corporation. I don't know if you remember the logo. But I said to him, "What do you do?" And he said to me, "I used to work at Great Direct, but I've got one client, and they hired me." I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Cotton. We're going to tell people that cotton's good to have on your clothes." It was like 1978. I said, "What am I wearing?" Like, if I'm not wearing, like, I don't know, why is that important?
What am I wearing?
Right. And it spawned, obviously, the whole business. So anyway, I think it's not as tough as we make it out to be. I think you got to get the right people in the room, and you've got to put context around it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then find a company that would be willing to do that kind of work for us. And as I said, it really isn't expensive today. Social media is relatively inexpensive, and I think the outreach is significant. And I'm watching people do it like on LinkedIn. I see a lot more recognition. You guys do it often around the associate, and it's really refreshing to see, but I think that has to expand.
And promoting it, I think, where you're going to is promoting it outside of the industry as
Correct.
well as just not just inside the industry. There's a lot of inside the industry stuff, right? But it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Absolutely
It
bigger
really
than
is, and we've had marketing experts on the podcast before, and I certainly won't claim to be one of those, but I was talking to someone that does marketing in our industry a lot, and this whole concept of being an influencer, and which is a very loaded term. We could talk about that for a while. But I asked her, I said, what size marketing department does a security company, and her response to me was, well, how many employees do you have? How many managers? And I sort of gave her a rough number, and she says, that's how many people you already have in your marketing department. You've got to really plug that in, because also the days of just having the company push the narrative and the line, you actually have to use those employees who, by the way, not to date all of us here, but when I first started, if you had something good or bad to say, you'd pull out a pen and a piece of paper, or in some people's case, a quill and an ink quill or something. And dear company,
the suggestion box.
Now within a nanosecond, you can blast out positive and negative things for literally the whole world to see. So spotlighting those stories is very important. And the encouraging thing, but also the discouraging thing, is the stories are already there. And not to, again, certainly make a bad name of marketing folks. They do great work. But sometimes they have to, we got to really punch up this story. We got to make it. You don't have to do that in the security industry. We all attend functions, and you hear about not just the heroic things, which, by the way, we don't do a very good job of telling those stories either, but just the day in and day out, some of the unseen things. So as an industry, we have to do a better job.
I agree. And to your point on resources, the interesting part, there's a technical component, right? All the SEO folks that are telling you how the algorithms change, and now you've got machine learning and AI adding a whole new layer to search. But at the end of the day, the thought used to be we market because we want to get new business. Well, actually, you market now really to your own employees in building that brand. And when I think of DSI, I other than thinking of you and Alan and the family, I think of a family business, because I ran one for 14 years and was part of one. I had my brothers and my dad. And that really manifested something in me, which was I didn't take rejection very well, because it was like, what are you talking about? Well, why wouldn't you do business with us, right? It's me. And that's a story. And I first wanted to hide behind it, because we sold to a lot of bank and brokerage insurance companies. These are big companies. If they knew we were 42 people, in a warehouse somewhere, I'm not sure that they would have felt that differently. And we hired a marketing director, actually an outsourced company, very famous guy, Greg Donato. He's been written up in Adweek. And he said, no, that is your story. And in the first brochure we printed, the second quote right next to the director of MetLife was my mother. And the quote was, I love watching my boys go to work together with their dad, except for on Sunday when it's time to eat. I thought he was crazy. I mean, I said, you're not going to print that, are you? And I cannot tell you what that meant. So there's a branding internal, and then there's a recruiting portion, right? We're recruiting for less talent. And so why? Is it the $15 an hour, or is it the paid for education? Or is it the gas card? Or is it the fact that my brother works there and his uncle worked there, and they've been there a long
behind
time?
The business,
So there's three prongs to that, and I think everybody wins. And I think as an industry, and I'd be one that would put my money where my mouth is in terms of wanting to collaborate and do something with with leadership to do that. Maybe.
Well, at the end of this episode, we'll have a GoFundMe link.
Perfect. I got the first $5 on the way.
Exactly. Yeah, you raise an excellent point, and again, not being a marketing expert, but we have the type of industry where I always refer to it as it's hard to do direct sales. And I've talked to marketing people from other industries, and Their goal is do this ad and reap this market share.
Right.
Buy this product.
Right.
And with us, it's I always view it as building that credibility, building that brand, especially in this industry, is showing. Mark and I were talking before we started taping. Showing proof of concept, showing those case studies, showing how things actually work.
Well, Mark, you've got to be all over that now,
prove
right?
that you solve problems. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's since the caveman. The good news is since the caveman hasn't changed. Know me, trust me, buy from me.
Yeah.
Never changed.
Yeah.
The methods and tactics are different, but that's at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And when you can put next to your company name 50 years in business, there's a trustworthiness, right?
Yeah.
The better housekeepers seal of
Absolutely.
approval, something like that.
Well, Jeff, let's close with this question. I asked you before about what CEOs and owners are concerned about. What do we have to be excited about in the future?
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to in the next few
Wow.
years?
You guys know this because I post a lot and I'm excited and I speak to people on all ends of the technology spectrum, from drone flyers and the likes. And what I would say is that what's exciting is the things that always held the industry back, right? And there wasn't an owner I talked to that didn't say, wow, this margin is so tough and it's so hard to make a living and it's so hard to recruit. Well, I got good news for you. We've got the perfect triangulation of our industry, right? We've got technology now that's in the cloud, so you don't have to come out with a large investment.
Yep.
So, shrinking prices, Moore's Law has affected sensors. There's, 20 trillion sensors now that are affecting all the, Internet of Things. And so we've got a reduction of cost. We've got a willing participant. In other words, no one looks at their balance sheet and says, wow, I don't want to report this year. The taxes are going to kill me, right? So we have willing participants. And best of all, and I've said this before, you can look towards consumer companies to draw the air cover for us. Because what I say to a lot of our owners is that you think for a minute when the guy gets an ADT commercial or a Ring commercial and he's a security director, he just forgets that. He left that in his living room.
Right.
That comes to work.
Yeah.
So we now have air cover.
Yeah.
I talked about air cover before.
Yeah.
So it's going to tip good. So the things that we have to look forward to is that we've got the big boys providing air cover about what technology actually does, solutions that it provides. We've got a reduction in cost, and we've got very tight margin and a shortness of supply of labor. So I think we're in a really good shape going forward. Recessions traditionally, you guys would know better. You have more revolutions in recessions, but I would say that this is probably one of the safest industries to be in, other than the bar business and maybe the funeral business, right? In terms of what
Which
you can
one could
expect.
follow the other?
Exactly.
I wonder how that evolved.
Yeah.
But so I'm not the answer is I'm very optimistic. And of course I got a horse in the race because I believe that, the mobile side of what we do is the last mile. And I try, Eddie, you do this very well, but I try to give these anecdotal examples of how it fits other industries. And I think the restaurants were really good examples.
Yeah.
The ghost kitchens, the new point of sale systems, the DoorDash is the last mile. So we'll be part of that, hopefully transformative and an assistant.
It's
in
happening
that.
everywhere. Why not in our industry, right?
100%.
Well said.
Well, thank you guys very, very much for having me.
Thank you, Jeff, for joining us.
And I look forward to hearing more of your podcast and being part of this excitement and enthusiasm for raising our industry.
Sure. Thanks for your time, and I'm already looking forward to part 2 with
Same here. I'm glad.
So.
I'm glad he kept the nugget to the end. I mean, people have to watch now to the end, right? Great job, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, next time I think we just turn the microphones on and leave and let Jeff. And then, we probably
bring your notes next time if you can.
Yeah,
that's great.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you
Thanks.
guys both. Have a great day.